Lots of things going on. I want to begin with the story that is taking up a lot of my brain. And that is what happened to the beautiful and literally intrepid, right? They used to use that word, intrepid reporter. This woman is an intrepid reporter, Lara Logan, who was set upon by a mob in a brutal sex violent attack in Cairo. And I'm going to give you the details. They're ugly. And if you have little kids with you, maybe you'll want to make it lower or tune it out. I won't be purposely graphic, but it's an ugly, ugly situation what happened to her. Let's give a little bit of background into Lara Logan. She's a 60 Minutes correspondent. She is a very experienced reporter. She hails from South Africa. And this is not the first time that she has put herself in real danger. In fact, she was hurt, really hurt, when she was in Afghanistan during the early part of that war. And she has a history of being very, very brave. And in Egypt, and particularly in Egypt, she was already thrown out of the country, but somehow she got back in. And she really wanted to cover this story close up. Well, here's what happened to her. And I want to note something to you. There's a story within a story here. You probably know the nightmare of what happened to Lara Logan a little bit. You know that she was sexually assaulted and beaten for what is estimated to be 20 to 30 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes. While she was separated from her own crew, she was eventually rescued by a group of women, as well as apparently 20 Egyptian police, who I guess eventually saw her and were able to stop the mob of men from brutally sexually attacking her. Now, this story is being reported in all kind of papers and all kind of blogs online. The only place that gave the pretty important detail, which I'm going to explain to you in just a minute, was the New York Post. And here's the detail. And I'm going to read it to you because they tell you what happened, and no other paper has told us what happened. That's why I say it's a story within a story, and I'd like to encourage you to tell me why you think it is that only the New York Post reports that correspondent Lara Logan was repeatedly sexually assaulted by thugs yelling, "Jew, Jew," as she covered the chaotic fall of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak in the main square on Friday. Also reported in the story is that apparently the mob was screaming "Jew, Jew" during the assault, and the day before they had hassled her and her crew and accused them of being Israeli spies. Now, the fact is she's not Jewish. It's not particularly important, is it? But it's just true. She's not Jewish. What's more important is that she was apparently assaulted, in part motivated by the fact that this crowd thought that she was. So not only is it dangerous for a woman altogether to be in the Arab world alone, even though she wasn't alone, but it's dangerous because in so many parts of the Arab world, women are supposed to wear burqas. They're supposed to be covered up. At the very least, they're supposed to have their hair covered, and they're supposed to not be in a situation where they would be threatening to men in terms of doing a man's job. They're supposed to be buried out there barefoot and pregnant, right? Right? That's what they're supposed to be. So any deviation from that is an assault on certain men's sensibility in the Arab world. That's just a fact. But on top of that, they thought she was a Jew. So a female and a Jew, apparently too irresistible a combination not to attack and brutally sexually assault. She is in a hospital now in the United States. She was flown out of Egypt. Thank God she got out of there. And, of course, our prayers, our thoughts are with her. This is a very, very brave reporter. But I have to ask you, what is the first reaction that you hear, that you think to yourself when you hear about this? The New York Post's headline is animals. I'll go with that. I'll go with animals. But what about that we're all hearing that these protesters are nonviolent and they're all so wonderful and they're waiting for the good days to come, and what they want is a better, more free Egypt, and now a better, more free Bahrain, and a better, more free Iran, and a better, more free Yemen and Tunisia, and this whole thing just sweeping the Arab world day in, day out. Do you think maybe that there are people behind this who are maybe stirring up the sweaty rabble, as Shakespeare used to say? Do you think maybe there is some organization behind what appears to be chaos? Even if there isn't, look at the brainwashed hatred. Look at this. Look at this with a clear eye. The way Daniel Pearl was executed, and his last words were, "I am a Jew." Remember that? Remember how he was taken? He was taken and he was executed as a journalist because he was white, American, Jewish. Done, done, and done. They thought this woman was Jewish. Oh my God. Insult to injury. Why is it that only the New York Post reports that important motivating fact? Now, I happen to be a Jewish woman. You know that. You're listening to me. I authored a book with my mom and my sister, Secrets of a Jewish Mother. So I'll be the first to admit that when I see something like this, obviously I'm standing up and taking notice. Because I think to myself, Lisa, if you were a lot braver than you are, could have been you. Right? You could be doing your job, thinking of yourself as a media reporter in some strange circumstance, trying to bring truth to people, and you could be attacked by virtue of your identity. Now, I think I told you just a couple of days ago how I feel about women walking alone in parking lots. I'm not talking about politics here. I'm talking about in good old the United States of America, how women always have to be careful and sensible of their personal safety. That's not what this was. This wasn't an isolated mugging in a dark place. This was a mob. This was a mob scene of thugs that set upon this woman, and it took 20 members of the Egyptian army and other women to stop them. Can you imagine the scene? If it took 20 members of the Egyptian army to stop the attack on this poor woman, who was obviously separated from the men that were supposed to protect her, and who probably feel terrible about the fact that they couldn't protect her, what does this say about this part of the world? I suppose you could argue, well, Lisa, don't be so naive. Mobs can happen everywhere. I don't see this kind of a thing. If you had said to me they stormed the palace, if you had said to me that a mob broke open a police barricade, that kind of anger fueled by a mob and people were trampled and stampeded to death, that I understand. When people's political passions are raised, I understand those kinds of terrible accidents, or what happened in Tiananmen Square years ago, where the people truly protested against China and some were killed. They were martyrs to their kind of freedom. They were speaking up against communism. I understand that kind of violence in a town square. This is not that. This is street thuggery on a grand scale. This is the kind of violent act that comes out of an ignorant prejudice that I'm scared of. Aren't you? Aren't you scared that there are 80 million Egyptians now who think they control the keys to the kingdom? I'm not saying Mubarak was such a great leader. Clearly he wasn't. His own people wanted to throw him out. But I'm suggesting to you that the substitution, that what comes next, may be a lot worse than what was there. That's the frightening thing. The larger story of Lara Logan herself being a brave woman reporter in a part of the world that doesn't appreciate bravery women or reporters. That's one segment. The other part that concerns me is the obvious censorship by the press that does not want to disclose the fact that they yelled Jew, Jew as they were beating her and sexually assaulting her. That's another very important piece of the puzzle for me. And let's talk in general about what change can bring. Do you think this is an isolated incident, or does it bespeak a people with such deep prejudices and deep ignorance that are so easily incited to terrible violence that this is a bad harbinger of things to come? And yes, I do think that there is something to the fact that only the New York Post is reporting that she was called a Jew as she was being beaten. I think there is something to it. I think there is a tendency in the press to not want to admit that this pervasive, it's not even anti-Semitism, that's too nice a word. This Jewish hatred, this, whatever you would call it, this horrible prejudice against Jews that has brainwashed so much of the Arab population. And it gets me back to the situation that if Israel didn't exist, they would still find a reason to hate. If you look at a map, you can see that Israel can't possibly be the cause of all this problem in the Arab world. It's just not feasible. It's just not reasonable. Go look at a map and see how much land we're talking and arguing about. If Jordan, which by the way didn't exist before 1946, you know that, right? It wasn't called Jordan. In fact, a lot of it was what is now considered to be Palestine, i.e. part of the West Bank and Jordan. If Jordan wanted to, they could have given a lot of the displaced Palestinians plenty of land. They chose not to. If Egypt wanted to, it could welcome the Gazans in and make them wonderful members of the Egyptian community with free trade and a higher standard of living. They don't want to. If the Arabs didn't have the Jews to yell at, they'd have to find something else to hate each other about. So it's just a convenient scapegoat. I'm not saying that there aren't problems between, Israel and some of its neighbors, and the fact that the West Bank and Gaza live in terrible poverty, and that there aren't real political issues there that need to be resolved, and border disputes. But the fact is, they don't want to let the Jews have anything. They don't. They don't want to let the Jews have even a little bissel of land in the Middle East called Israel. And that's an unreasonable position, because it's not going to ever return to the other way unless Israel takes a whole lot of people with it. That I can tell you. That's pretty obvious. I mean, 6 million Jews died during World War II without a fight. That was the crime of it. It was without a fight. They walked into the gas chambers. Sure, there was the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and there were isolated pockets of resistance and partisans, but on the whole, most of the millions of people walked into their fate. And when they tried to go to other countries like the United States of America, they were turned away. They were turned away. Only the Dominican Republic, the tiny little island nation of the Dominican Republic, allowed as many Jews as wanted to immigrate to get there. But by the time the vast majority of Jews realized it was too late. They were already in the concentration camps. When something hasn't happened before in history, it's hard to imagine that it is happening even as it's happening. I think it was incomprehensible to so many people that there would be this mass genocide plan with blueprints and gas chambers and people's skin made into soap and lampshades and their gold teeth. I mean, you only have to visit the Holocaust museums to see what I'm talking about. So I think that now that we know it can happen and did happen, we would say to ourselves, well, didn't they know what could happen? But at the time, it had never happened before. So when Israel became Israel in 1948, I will tell you as a Jew, the mantra of the Jewish people is, if we have to die again as Jews, okay, but we take a lot of people with us this time. This time we die in our land for what we believe in, and we don't go down without a fight. That's for certain. That you can bet on. So to think about this Egyptian mob tackling this poor, beautiful, brave correspondent, and that she succumbed and clearly was terribly injured. We don't really know the extent of her injuries. It's been kept quiet. Now it's coming out. And it took all these people to quell that mob. It says a lot about who that mob is and what their eventual aims are.